Good afternoon and welcome to the fourth of our recipes. So today is Good Friday and I'm going to make some hot cross buns. Now obviously you need quite a bit of time when you're making hot cross buns, so I'm going to take a few shortcuts and I'm also going to do a blue Peter trick, and in that I've already made one lot of dough so I can show you. So, hot cross buns are in enriched bread dough, and like any bread, you need to use strong flour. You can buy this in any of the supermarkets. This tends to cost a little bit more than a normal plain flour, but it is important to use strong flour because it has more gluten in, and gluten is what makes your dough nice and stretchy, and so it will rise up. So I'm just going to measure out now 500 grams, which is the same as a pound of flour. Just get that in a nice big mixing bowl. There we are. And then into this we're going to add some salt. So you need 1 teaspoon of salt for each 500 grams of flour. So we've got a teaspoon there. I tend to use low salt, slightly better for you. Obviously you can use any salt that you want to. And then I'm also going to use some dried yeast. Now you can buy yeast in different forms, and I'm adding my yeast straight into the flour mixture. You'll find that in some recipes that you put your liquid together and add the yeast to it with some sugar and let it get frothy. Well, this is quick action yeast, so you can just add it into your flour. So the alternative is using one of the sachets, and again it's 1 sachet for 500 grams. I've got the tins, and you do need to make sure with the tin that you've got the quick action one. When you put it into your bowl, just make sure it doesn't go next to the salt. So I'm going to use 2 level teaspoons of yeast, and it would be the same as 1 sachet if you buy it in the sachets. Also into that I'm going to add some spices. Now I like my hot cross buns with lots of spice in, so I'm going to use a teaspoon of cinnamon and a teaspoon of mixed spice. Sometimes you can put things like nutmeg in as well. As I say, I like a good teaspoon of each of those. And because we're making a sweet bun, I've got 50 grams of sugar. And it doesn't really matter what sort of sugar you use in the recipe here. I have got caster sugar, but you could use granulated, you could use brown sugar. So that's all the dried ingredients in. So I'll just put my scales out of the way now. And then we've got our liquids. Now normally for bread you just use water, but being an enriched mixture I'm going to use half milk and half water. So you need half a pint or 250 millilitres with each 500 grams or pound of flour. So I'm going to use half milk and half water. Just check that that's right. Get it from eye level. And you need to warm this, so I'm just going to pop it in the microwave for 30 seconds, and that will just warm it to room temperature. Especially if your milk has come out of the fridge, it can be quite cool. So you just want it so it's warm to the touch. Now, yeast is a living organism. It's a plant fungus, and like any living thing, it needs water, it needs food, and it needs warmth to grow. And it grows better in warmer conditions. But at the same time, because it is living, you've got to be careful that you don't get your water, your mixture too hot, because that will kill the yeast. So you need to be careful that it is just warm. If you have a thermometer, then it's 38 degrees, body temperature is ideal. And into that, I'm also going to add an egg. There we are. And I'm just going to whisk that up slightly. There we are. So that's going to now go into all our dried ingredients. And bread, unlike many things, you do need to add all your liquid together. A lot of recipes you add the liquid a little bit at a time until you get it the right consistency. But if you do that with bread, you often end up with a dough that's a bit hard and dry. So I'm going to add this all in and mix it in with my wooden spoon till all the flour's incorporated. And what you want to end up with is a soft dough. Now, when I used to do this at school, sometimes we'd end up with some very soft doughs, perhaps if they hadn't measured things correctly. And it was often those children that had got their dough a bit too sticky to begin with that ended up with the best bread, because you do need it quite light and sticky. So don't worry if it does feel very sticky to begin with. So I'm just going to bring that all together, and once it's all sticking, then you can use your hands. And if you just put a little bit of flour onto your hands, it just helps for them not to stick to the dough, especially at this stage. So I'm just going to get the flour now from around the bowl. You can obviously use wholemeal flour as well, or brown flour. The thing to remember there is that because it contains more fibre, you may need a little bit more liquid into your dough. So that's there, that's quite nice and sticky. It's nice and warm. So our next process now is to knead the dough. Now, I have to own up in that I have got a big mixer with a dough hook, and so most of the time when I'm making bread I tend to do it in the mixer. I've also got a bread machine. Those are brilliant. Always feels a bit like magic. You just put all the ingredients into the bread machine, switch it on, and a few hours later you've got a lovely loaf of bread. And you can even set it so that you've got bread fresh in the morning. So I'm just going to put a little bit of water into the bowl to make it easier to wash up later, because otherwise it tends to set a bit solid. I'll just get there. There we are. Now you can knead in oil as well. That is another way of doing it. I've never really cottoned on to that, but I do tend to use flour. And you need just enough flour so it doesn't stick to the surface. And as I say, if you've got flour on your hands as well, that helps, but not too much. You don't want to dry the dough out. So kneading, there's various techniques for kneading. Again, when I was teaching children at school who were novices, I tended to very much tell them to take it forward with their fingertips and then press it forward with their knuckles. And it's always easier, I think, kneading a bigger piece of dough than it is a small. Or you may use taking it forward with my fingertips and then pushing it forward with the palm of my hand. So, as it's just sticking a little bit, just get a little bit more flour. You'll find as you work it, that stickiness tends to go, but you do want it quite light and soft. So this now needs kneading for about 5 minutes or so. So it's good exercise, and it's a nice thing to do, nice feel to it. However, I don't think you want to watch me kneading for 5 minutes. So I'm going to do my blue Peter act now and find my dough. So once you've kneaded it, you need to knead it until when you press it, it rises back up. You can still see already that it is quite springy, but it is leaving a bit of a finger mark. So the more you knead it, the more you develop the gluten in it. And as I said at the beginning, the gluten is what makes your bread, the structure of your bread. When I was teaching, I used to wash away the starch from a piece of dough, and you'd be left with just these stringy bits of gluten, so the children could actually see what was there. And it's what gives you structure to all your baked goods. So, anyway, so once you've kneaded it, you can put it back into a bowl if you just lightly grease the bowl, and then you need to leave it until it's double in size. So I'm going to do my blue Peter bit now, and in the bowl here, which I did actually knead in my big mixer, I've got my dough that is all nice and risen up. You can see it's very, very soft, and you can see how. So the next stage now is to get this out and just to knock it back, get the even up the texture of it again, and so that the gas is distributed. So being a microorganism, yeast, being a plant, produces carbon dioxide, and it's carbon dioxide gas that is going to make your bread rise. We use a few different gases when we're baking. When we're whisking, things like meringues, and you're adding in air. There we are. So just give that a light kneading now. And of course, any water you put in a mixture produces steam, which is another gas that helps things to rise. So I've got that now kneaded, nice and smooth. So you would probably need to have left it for a couple of hours to rise. It depends a bit how warm your kitchen is. You may have an airing cupboard that you can put bread to rise in. I made mine up before I went to do the Good Friday service, so it had about 2 hours. So that's the dough there. Now, the next thing, you may be thinking, well, what you've missed out? Well, I've missed out the dried fruit, because if you add that in to begin with, you find that it doesn't rise particularly well, and when you start kneading it, all the dried fruit comes out. So what I tend to do is add it in now at this stage, before we actually shape the hot cross buns. So I'm just pulling my dough apart a bit, and I'm just going to incorporate the dried fruit in. I've got mixed fruit, so that's a mixture of sultanas, raisins, currants, and some dried fruits. So just incorporate that and a few more. And we just start mixing those in. Just knead them into your mixture. And you may find that some of them drop out as you do it, but don't worry, just stick them back in again. There we are. So I've got about 50 grams there of dried fruit. Whoops, there we go. Just incorporate them into your mixture. And they should, as you knead it, just get fairly evenly spread through the mixture. Now sometimes people will even leave their dough to rise again at this stage. You can give it another proving, but I'm going to just carry on. So obviously the more you let it prove and rise, then the lighter your hot cross buns are going to be. And with some breads, particularly things like pizzas, I quite often just make the mixture and roll it out, shape my pizza, and then just let it rise till it's doubled in size, and then cook it straight away. I don't do a first proving, because obviously pizza, it's not as important to get it really light. So that's got the fruit quite well distributed now through the mixture. And so I'm going to divide this up. So I've used 500 grams of flour, or a pound of flour, if you're still working old money. So I'm going to divide this into 12. So if you've got children with you, you can do a quick maths lesson in division. So I'm going to cut it in half, and each of those in half. And then each one will need to go into 3 to give us 12. You can be very precise and cut your dough and weigh it if you want to, but you can usually do it by eye. So it's thinking then how you're going to get these into nice bun shapes. Again, you've got a little bit of flour on the table, just flatten it down a little bit, and then just take, with your tips of your fingers, just take the edges into the middle, turning it as you go. And you should find then that when you turn it over, it's nice and smooth on the other side, and just round it around. So I'm going to get my baking tray, which I should have put some oil on earlier, didn't. So again, just very lightly greased baking tray. And what you've got to remember is that your buns are going to rise, so you need to give a little bit of space in between them. So just flatten the dough, work it around with your fingertips. There we are, until you get all 12. So again, that's going to take a little bit of time. Now, there's various ways of putting the crosses into your hot cross buns. The way I think is probably the easiest is just to use a very sharp knife and make an X in it. And I tend to do that just before I put them into the oven, and then they have that extra rising, and that they should just come apart to get the X on the top. Other ways of doing it is to make up a little bit of dough just with flour and water and roll it out and make strips to go on it. Or you can even make a mixture with water and flour and make it quite runny, and then pipe it out of an icing bag. So there's different ways. If you want it a little bit softer, add a little bit of oil in with the flour as well. But as I say, I tend to find it's a bit time consuming. You might like to do it. I tend to just make an X with a sharp knife. Now, of course, any of you that are watching that go to St Wilfrid's Church regularly will know that Mary Stoneham is an expert hot cross bun maker, and she makes quite a lot of money for the church every Lent by making and selling her hot cross buns, and I have to say they are absolutely delicious. So we're getting on there. We've nearly got 12, well, we've got halfway there. So as we make these final ones now, I've talked about the crosses on the top, and once these on the tray now, you put them again in a warm place to rise until they're about doubled in size, and they probably will rise into each other. And then they need to go into a very hot oven. So one of the tips with breaking bread is to have a really hot oven. If you've got electric, 230. If you've got gas, about gas mark 7, gas mark 8, quite nice and high. And if you want them a slightly softer texture, one thing you can do is put a tray with some water in the bottom of your oven, and that creates some steam, and it just gives you a softer crust to your bread or the bread buns. So that's just another little tip for you. And make sure your oven is really well preheated so that it's nice and hot when they go in. Get the last 3 done. Almost there. And so of course hot cross buns we have on Good Friday to remind us of Jesus dying on the cross. And the question I always get asked by children is, why do they call it Good Friday when Jesus died? Well, it's because through him dying on the cross that we are saved. If we know that we all do things wrong, and we can ask for God's forgiveness, and through Jesus dying, that means that we can be forgiven. And of course we know it's not the end of the story, because Jesus overcame death, and on Easter Sunday he rose again at new life. And so on Easter Sunday we have our Easter eggs. There's lots of stories about how they originated. Obviously eggs have always been something associated with this time of year, of new life, but we can also think about eggs representing the stone being rolled away from the tomb and the new life emerging. When I was a little girl, we didn't tend to have chocolate eggs very much. We had 1 egg each, a real treat, but we always did have eggs, real eggs on Easter Sunday, and we'd sometimes decorate them up with felt pens or something before we ate them. And so you can see the rolls there. So these are going to go on one side, and they're going to rise until they're double in size. Once they've done that, they're going to go in the oven for about 10-15 minutes. And when they come out, you may want to glaze them. Now, one recipe I used says you can just glaze them with golden syrup. I prefer to make my own glaze. I just mix a little bit of water or milk with some sugar and just bring it up to the boil, and then glaze them as soon as they come out of the oven. And you may want to brush them with a bit of milk or milk and egg wash too before they go in the oven, and that gives them that nice golden brown texture. So there we are, that's our 4th recipe completed. I hope you've enjoyed watching those. So I'm going to leave those now to rise.